Surprise, I sold your childhood home. My stepfather's voice crackled through the phone, dripping with satisfaction. The new owners want to tear it down and build something modern. Not that it matters to you anymore. I gripped my phone tighter, my hand shaking as I stared at the familiar white fence and rose garden my mother had lovingly tended for 20 years. I'd driven by to check on the place, only to find a sold sign stabbed into our perfectly manicured lawn. My name is Amanda Wells, and at 35, I was watching my stepfather destroy the last piece of my mother's legacy, all while he gloated about it from 3 states away. You can't sell the house, Frank, I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. Mom left it to me in her will. His laugh was sharp, cruel. Oh, but I can. Your precious mother made one little mistake before she died. She never changed the deed. It's still in my name, sweetheart. Legally, I can do whatever I want with it. The roses my mother had planted were in full bloom, their pink petals catching the morning light. She'd spent every spring Saturday tending to them, teaching me the proper way to prune and care for each variety. Now Frank had sold them, along with every other memory this place held, without even warning me. You know she wanted me to have the house, I said. She told you that before she died. What your mother wanted doesn't matter anymore, Frank replied. She's been gone for 2 years, and I'm tired of holding on to this place just because you can't let go. Besides, you're doing well enough with your fancy lawyer job in Boston. You don't need a house in suburban Connecticut. What Frank didn't know, what I carefully kept from him for the past year, was that I'd been preparing for something exactly like this. My mother hadn't just told me she wanted me to have the house. She'd left me very specific instructions about Frank and what to do if he ever tried something like this. How much did you sell it for? I asked, keeping my tone casual. $750, he said proudly. Way more than your mother paid for it 25 years ago. See, I did you a favor. The property value couldn't have gone higher than this. I smiled, though he couldn't see it. That's interesting, Frank. Really interesting. What's that supposed to mean? His voice had lost some of its smugness. Oh, nothing, I said. I just think it's fascinating that you sold a house worth $1.2 million for only $750,000. The real estate market in this area is booming. Did you even get it appraised? There was a pause on his end. You're lying. The housing market is down. Actually, I'm not. But hey, it's your house to undersell, right? I'm sure you did your research before accepting the first offer that came along. I could almost hear him squirming. Listen here, you little. No, you listen, Frank. I cut him off. Mom might not have changed the deed, but she left me something much more valuable. All the documentation of your financial fraud during your marriage. The silence on the other end was deafening. What are you talking about? His voice had lost its edge. The offshore accounts, the money you embezzled from her business, the fake investment schemes you ran using her clients' information? Mom knew about all of it. She kept every piece of evidence, every document, every transaction record. And she left it all to me with very specific instructions about what to do if you ever tried to take what was rightfully mine. You're bluffing, he said, but I could hear the fear creeping into his voice. I pulled into the driveway of my childhood home, watching as the morning sun cast long shadows across the front porch where my mother and I used to share Sunday morning coffee. Remember that safe in Mom's office? The one you could never crack? I opened it last year. Want to know what I found inside? Frank's breathing had become heavy on the other end of the line. Here's what's going to happen, I continued. You're going to call the buyers and cancel the sale. You're going to transfer the deed to my name, just like Mom wanted. And you're going to do it all quietly and quickly. And why would I do that? He challenged, but his voice was weak. Because if you don't, every piece of evidence Mom collected goes straight to the FBI. I wonder how many years of tax evasion and fraud they'll find once they start digging. You wouldn't dare, he whispered. Try me, I replied. You have 48 hours, Frank. Oh, and one more thing. Mom left instructions about what to do with the evidence even if you do comply. If anything happens to me, if you try to retaliate in any way, everything gets sent to the authorities automatically. I've made sure of that. I ended the call and sat in my car, looking at the house I'd grown up in. Mom had known Frank would try something like this eventually. She prepared me, protected me, even from beyond the grave. I won't let him take your home, Mom, I whispered, touching the locket around my neck that held her picture. I promise. The next move was Frank's, But for the first time since my mother's death, I felt like I had the upper hand. He'd always underestimated me, just like he underestimated my mother. Now he was about to learn that the women in our family weren't as helpless as he thought. I had 48 hours to wait, but I wasn't worried. The evidence in that safe was just the tip of the iceberg. Mom had been much smarter than Frank ever gave her credit for, and so was I. The next 24 hours were a whirlwind of activity. Frank, predictably, tried every trick in his book to wriggle out of the situation. First came the angry calls, then the threats, followed by attempts at emotional manipulation. "Your mother would be ashamed of you," he snarled in his third voicemail. "Using blackmail against your own family?" I let out a bitter laugh as I deleted the message. Family? Frank had never treated me like family. From the moment he married my mother, I was just an inconvenience, a reminder of her past that he couldn't erase. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from my best friend Diana, who also happened to be a real estate attorney. "Just got off the phone with Frank's lawyer. They're scrambling." I smiled, remembering how my mother had always told me to keep good friends and better records. Diana had been helping me piece together Frank's financial misdeeds for the past year, carefully building an airtight case while he remained blissfully unaware. The doorbell rang, interrupting my thoughts. Through the peephole, I saw Mrs. Henderson, our elderly neighbor who'd lived next door for 30 years. I opened the door to find her clutching a manila envelope. "Amanda, dear," she said, stepping inside. "I have something you need to see. I've been holding onto it since your mother passed." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where Mom and I had shared countless meals, as Mrs. Henderson pulled out a stack of papers. "Your mother came to me about 6 months before she died," she explained, spreading the documents across the table. "She knew Frank was up to something, but she was too sick to fight him then. She asked me to be a witness." The papers were additional evidence of Frank's fraudulent activities. Copies of forged checks, altered bank statements, and emails discussing illegal transactions. But what caught my eye was a handwritten letter from my mother, dated just weeks before she passed. "My dearest Amanda," it began, "if you're reading this, then Frank has finally shown his true colors. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from him while I was alive, but I made sure you have everything you need to protect yourself after I'm gone." Tears blurred my vision as I read her words. Even in her final days, she'd been thinking ahead, planning, making sure I would be okay. Mrs. Henderson patted my hand. "She was a brilliant woman, your mother. Frank never saw it because he was too busy thinking he was the smartest person in the room. But she documented everything." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Diana. "Frank's lawyer is requesting an urgent meeting. Tomorrow morning, their office. Want me to handle it?" I looked at the fresh evidence Mrs. Henderson had brought, then at my mother's letter. "No," I replied. "I want to be there. It's time Frank faced me directly." The next morning, I walked into the law office wearing my mother's favorite power suit and her locket around my neck. Frank was already there, looking significantly less smug than he had during our phone call. His lawyer, a sleek man in an expensive suit, sat beside him with a concerned expression. "Miss Wells," the lawyer began, "we've reviewed your claims and would like to discuss a resolution." I sat down, placing my briefcase on the table. "The resolution is simple. Frank cancels the house sale and transfers the deed to me, as my mother wanted." "Now see here," Frank started, but his lawyer held up a hand to silence him. "The situation is more complicated than that," the lawyer continued. "Mr. Davidson has already entered into a legally binding contract with the buyers." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Then he can explain to them why he tried to sell a property that was obtained through fraudulent means. I'm sure they'd be interested in these documents." Frank's face turned red. "You're bluffing. You can't prove anything." I started laying out papers one by one. Bank statements showing transfers to offshore accounts. Emails discussing money laundering through Mom's business. Forged documents with your signature. And this morning, I received even more evidence from a very reliable witness. The lawyer picked up one of the documents, his expression growing increasingly grave as he read. "That's not even everything," I continued. "Mom kept detailed records, Frank. Every time you stole from her, every time you used her business to hide your illegal dealings. She knew what you were doing, but she was too sick to stop you. So she made sure I could." Frank's lawyer leaned over to whisper something in his ear. The color drained from Frank's face. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I told you what I want. Cancel the sale. Transfer the deed to me, and then stay out of my life forever. And if I do this, what happens to those documents? I smiled, channeling my mother's strength. They stay exactly where they are, safe and secure. Consider them my insurance policy. If you ever try to come after me or my inheritance again, everything goes to the authorities. Mom made sure of that. The lawyer cleared his throat. Miss Wells, would you give us a moment with our client? I stood up, smoothing my skirt. Take all the time you need, but remember, the 48-hour deadline still stands. As I walked out of the conference room, I could hear Frank's angry whispers and his lawyer's urgent responses. I touched my mother's locket, drawing strength from it. You were right, Mom, I whispered. Sometimes the best defense is being prepared for the worst. Diana was waiting outside, ready to handle the legal details once Frank inevitably caved. We both knew he would. He had too much to lose if he didn't. Your mom would be proud, she said, squeezing my hand. You protected her legacy. I nodded, looking out the window at the city skyline. For the first time since my mother's death, I felt like I was truly honoring her memory, not just by saving our home, but by standing up to the man who had underestimated us both. 2 days later, I stood in my mother's garden, watching as Frank's lawyer handed over the final paperwork. The house sale had been canceled, the deed was in my name, and Frank had signed a legal agreement never to contest my ownership. Everything's in order, Diana confirmed, reviewing the documents one last time. The house is officially yours, Amanda. I knelt down to touch the soft petals of my mother's roses, remembering how she'd always said a garden was like life. It needed patience, care, and sometimes a little thorns for protection. Frank hadn't gone quietly, of course. He'd made one last desperate attempt to save face, trying to spin the story to family and friends about how he'd generously decided to honor my mother's wishes. But the truth had a way of coming out. My Aunt Susan, my mother's sister, called me that evening as I was settling back into my childhood home. I always knew Frank was no good, she said, her voice tight with anger. The way he treated you after your mother got sick, pushing you away when she needed you most. I should have said something sooner. It's not your fault, Aunt Susan, I replied, running my hand along the familiar kitchen counter. Mom knew what she was doing. She protected me in her own way. She certainly did, Susan laughed. You should have seen Frank's face at the country club yesterday. He practically ran out when people started asking about the house situation. Apparently, some rumors about his business dealings have started circulating too. I smiled, thinking of the small USB drive still safely tucked away in my mother's old safe. Frank might have avoided legal consequences for now, but his reputation in the community was another matter entirely. The next few weeks were a blur of activity. I took a leave of absence from my job in Boston to focus on restoring the house to its former glory. Every room held memories of my mother, but instead of feeling sad, I felt her presence guiding me. Mrs. Henderson became a regular visitor, bringing over casseroles and sharing stories about Mom that I'd never heard before. She knew Frank would try something like this eventually. Mrs. Henderson said one evening as we sat on the porch. That's why she started gathering evidence years ago. Your mother was always thinking ahead, protecting what mattered most. I just wish she'd been able to see him get what he deserved, I admitted. Mrs. Henderson smiled knowingly. Oh, but she did, through you. You're so much like her, Amanda. Same quiet strength, same determination. Frank never saw it coming because he never really saw either of you. She was right. Frank had always underestimated us, seeing my mother as just a successful businesswoman he could exploit, and me as the naive stepdaughter he could push aside. He never understood that we were playing the long game. The final piece of closure came in the form of a letter from Frank's lawyer. He was moving to Florida, presumably to escape the whispers and sideways glances that now followed him around town. His reputation was in tatters, his social standing destroyed. The mighty Frank Davidson had fallen, not through legal prosecution, but through the careful, patient planning of the women he thought he could control. As I sat in my mother's garden that evening, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold, I opened her locket and looked at her smiling face. We did it, Mom, I whispered. We protected your home, your legacy, everything you worked for. My phone buzzed with a text from Diana. Drinks tonight to celebrate. The whole neighborhood's talking about Frank's hasty departure. I smiled, typing back a quick reply. The celebration could wait. Right now, I wanted to sit in this garden, surrounded by the roses my mother had planted, and enjoy the peace that came with knowing I'd honored her final wishes. The house wasn't just a building or an inheritance. It was a testament to my mother's wisdom, her foresight, and her love. She'd known that sometimes the best revenge wasn't a dramatic confrontation or a legal battle, but simply being prepared and patient enough to let someone's true nature reveal itself. Frank had thought he was selling a house. What he'd really done was prove everything my mother had ever said about him. And in trying to take her last gift to me, he'd lost everything he truly cared about: his reputation, his social status, and his illusion of control. As the evening settled around me, I felt a sense of completion. My mother's roses would bloom again next spring, and the spring after that, their beauty and resilience a constant reminder that some things are worth protecting, worth fighting for, worth waiting for. And somewhere, I knew my mother was smiling, proud that her daughter had finally bloomed into the strong, capable woman she'd always known I could be.